Yo, welcome to Sig Slayers, the comic interview show, period. I'm Mike the Sig Slayers, chilling with Mark the Honorable Villain. What up, fam?
What's up, Mike? We got an animation legend with us today. This guy's worked on all of your childhood favorites, man. Let him know who we got, man.
Joining us today, we have legendary animator Tad Stones in the house. Before we chop it up with Tad, please like, subscribe, hit the notification bell, and please comment. All right. Our next guest is one of the OGs of Disney television animation. Gummy Bears did that. Darkwing Duck created that. Aladdin Series ran that. Ladies and gentlemen of the Stash Land, we bring to you the legend, animator and producer, Tad Stones. What's up, Tad?
Hey, not much. Just happy to be here. You guys are doing
We are happy to have you. We're going to just dive right on in. We got quite a few questions, and you're such a legend. So we're going to dive in. Okay, since it's your first time joining us, Tad, we'd like to know how you got your first job in animation. How was animation even an option for you?
I always wanted to be in animation in that my dad worked for Carnation Company, who had to deal with Disneyland. So like every year the company picnic was at Disneyland. And he was real supportive of any sort of cartooning and all that, because he had wanted to be a cartoonist, but he graduated basically in the Depression, so he didn't get a chance to follow his dream. But he had all these how to draw books and some animation books that I grew up with. And at Disneyland, there was an art of animation exhibit, and he bought me the Bob Thomas's The Art of Animation, which was based around Sleeping Beauty, but took you through every step of animation, building a feature film, a little bit of the Disney history. So that prepped me. But as I went through high school, looking toward college, it's like the only place I want to work in animation is Disney Studios, because they're the only ones doing full animation, meaning really acting and all that. And I said, they've got their guys, pretty much. So I don't know if that's an option. So I dabbled with the idea of going into comics. But then in college, I was an art major at first, and then my English teachers wanted me to switch to English because of my writing. And I found this major called Humanities, which should have combined both. And yet I didn't take another drawing class after I did that. There was all like 3D ceramics and sculpture and things like that. And I never took a writing course, strangely enough. But it all paid off because the sweet mate of the girl I was dating, her father was Ex Atencio, who's one of the animation legends, also worked at Imaginary, Pirates of the Caribbean famously. Anyway, she knew enough about what was going on. She said, you should apply to their training program. I went, what training program? She gave me the name of the guy in charge that I was to contact, which was easy to remember because his name was Donald Duckwall. He claimed he had the name first. So anyway, I called up just basically for information and wound up having an appointment to come in with my portfolio. Now, it had been 3 years since I had been an art major, so there was no portfolio. My ceramics teacher, who I was a TA to, he was a huge Disney fan and had just taken over the department because the head of the department was on sabbatical. So he arranged to get me into life drawing classes and sketching and all of that I had about a week to put together a bunch of drawing stuff. Anyway, I had the appointment. They liked what they saw, but they said, boy, we could really use this kind of drawing, more action drawings. And after I got in, I realized people took maybe weeks to do that sort of thing. And I thought they needed it right away, which paid off because I did a bunch of sketching from television, like sports games, and cheated by borrowing the Sports Illustrated magazines of my friends. Anyway, got it to them, within a few days, which when you think of it is a plus for animators who have to draw a lot in a short amount of time. Anyway, the review board looked at it. I was brought in for a training program, and at Disney Features, I arrived 5 or 6 months after Ron Clements, you might know from Ron and John Musker doing everything like Little Mermaid and Aladdin and Hercules and Moana and everything in between. And I arrived like 3 months before Glenn Keane, one of the best animators of all time. So that was the little slot I was in, and that was my first step into animation.
Okay, so wow, that's fantastic. Let's talk about the beginning of Disney television animation. You produced some iconic shows. Take us back to the formation of that department.
Well, when I had a weird career because after features, I'm not sure. When I was in features, I moved into story, but the head of it was during Fox and Hound, the directors changed. And I'm not sure they knew what to do with me, and they put me on this educational film, or they said, create this educational film. And I did. It was animated in New Zealand. So that was my first producing credit and writing credit, actually. And because I had done a good job of blending entertainment and education, they said, we're doing this project called Epcot Center. We want to send you over to WED, which was what Imagineering was called back then. So I went over there, worked on Transportation Pavilion with Ward Kimball. We shared an 8x10 office basically, which was awesome as one of the legends of animation. Then I worked on the Space Pavilion. You'll notice there is no Space Pavilion there. So that didn't go well, but I met George Lucas and was the only one uncool enough to ask him about Star Wars, which he was happy to talk about. Then worked on the Imagination Pavilion with Tony Baxter and Barry Braverman, which, Figment and Dreamfinder and all of that. And then I went back to the studio to do these Epcot educational documentaries, which ultimately fell through. Then I was kind of drifting and went back to features, and they said, we can't afford you anymore, because I had gotten little raises every time I moved to a different spot. But basically I couldn't automatically go into the department at a high level because I hadn't been there for years and years. But luckily I did some work over at, or would save me from a pay cut basically. As they said, the guys over in licensing want to work on some animated featurettes, because back then Disney features only came out once every 5 years or so. Because the department was only 55 people, I think, when I was first there. It's very small, turning out these feature films. Anyway,
around what time was this? Around what year was this?
I started at Disney in 1974, like 3 days after graduation. So, anyway, and then they actually said, if you make it, you're not going to get a vacation for a year. You sure you don't want to take any time? And I said, I'm not going to enjoy a vacation until I know whether or not I'm here. So it worked out. Anyway, I went over to this place and really impressed them in that they said, we've got to do, because features came out so far apart, they really wanted to be in television in some way. And they had the idea of doing little half-hour featurettes, like with Mickey or Goofy or whatever. The one thing they said, we have to do a Sport Goofy cartoon, which was what Goofy was called in Europe and was a huge soccer or football tie-in. And then wanted Mickey ideas too. Well, when we reconvened like 3 years later, the other writer who had come, because I was a guy who wrote and drew, so I was this chameleon there. The writer had come in with some like 1-line premise ideas, and I'd come in with 2 4x8 foot storyboards covered with colored drawings mapping out the storylines of 2 shows. And he was a real nice guy, but he just like turned his page over and he goes, yeah, that's okay. Anyway, I impressed them enough. When Michael Eisner came, animation was so important that, to him anyway, and the idea of TV animation specifically, where he had started at ABC, the Sunday of the first week he was there, he had a meeting, and I was actually on vacation, and got a phone call from the guys who had in licensing, who had done, or consumer products, I guess I should say, who had been impressed with me by coming up with those ideas and storyboarding, creating those projects. They said, we want him there too. And they called up and said, we know you're on vacation, would you mind coming to a meeting at Michael Eisner's house this Sunday? And it's like, I only knew what everybody knew from reading the newspaper, so I wasn't going to say no. So there were about 10 people there, and he basically went through ideas. I actually had a bunch of drawings of Mickey and the Space Pirates, which they thought were amazing, but he said, no, Mickey's too important. We can't do him until we know we can do him right. So let's talk about other things, other type of shows. And he actually said, my kids went to summer camp and they came back talking about this new candy, gummy bears. I swear if you do anything with the name gummy bears, it'll be a hit. So that was kind of our marching orders there. And I remember when we kind of regrouped right after that, I said, he seemed pretty sharp and he has good ideas. I mean, the guy is in entertainment, except for that gummy bears idea, cut 2 years later and I'm co-producing a season of it. Anyway, I did not immediately go to this department that didn't exist. I went back to whatever I was doing at the time, was this kind of advisory to the television guys about animation projects, and like a Donald 50th anniversary special. But they remembered me, and then I was thinking, and I'd been to the World Science Fiction Convention every year, which started back when I was working on Space Pavilion and other things. And I started to think, if I could make the same amount of money I'm making now by storyboarding freelance, maybe I'd leave and just, then for creativity, write science fiction stories. That was my idea. And here comes one of the guys who is now head of the new department. And he was visiting a lot. And I said, hey, do you guys use freelancers? Because I was totally ignorant. And he says, oh, I don't know that you want to do that. Why don't you come over and visit us? And they basically laid a trap, because I had forgotten they wanted me from day one. They'd never officially made that offer. But I went over and he started introducing me around. At this point, TV Animation was working on 2 shows, The Wuzzles and Gummy Bears. And it was only one hallway long. It was just a very small group of people. And he kind of introduced me, Tad may be coming over here. And I am, so I met with Jeffrey Katzenberg, and he said basically, hey, Tad, it's not a one-way street. All I know is they could really use you right now. And it turned out to be a great fit, because while my friends from features were working on one story for 5 years, I was better suited to come up with lots of story ideas, and maybe not at the schedule we had, which was insane, but it just was a better fit for me, and coming up with ideas like that. So that's basically, I shifted over TV Animation like that, and technically my title was creative manager, so I was an executive of some sort, but that didn't last long, because I was constantly coming up with ideas for the show, because I had no outside connections. Nobody told me the basics of, you should be calling agents and saying, we're taking pitches. I just totally ignorant. So we are coming up in a gong show where they just go through lots of ideas, give me the core of that idea, and we'll say yes or gong it, and you move on. And we had one coming up, and I think out of 22 shows, I think I pitched 17, 18, something like that of them. And I think Jim Megan pitched the rest, who had, created Gummy Bears. And then I first got on Gummy Bears the 3rd season. NBC wanted a change up, and I was the guy in the hallway, on it. And that was fun. And I wasn't given the title co-producer until the end of the show. And I said, if I had known that, I would have given different notes, because I gave notes on all the storyboards and scripts and all that. But
Ted, I have more questions about process and about show development. You've been a producer for many years. Can you tell us exactly the steps to show development and who decides the criteria for programming?
Like the gummy bears. Like you just mentioned like an idea. I think it was Michael Eisner, and you said that his kids love gummy bears. Do a show based off of gummy bears. Like what other like? Can you elaborate on how?
Well, I mean, that was again, that show was created by Jim Magon and Art Patello, who was the director of it, who knew animation, really taught Jim a lot about doing a show and what he would like to see in the show as a creative director, and how Jim was writing kind of informed the way I developed things. But really, back then, to pitch a show to the networks, you did it generally with 3 pieces of art. And one of those was like a title card with maybe a character standing next to it. And you would just pitch the basics of the idea, maybe a few more, but pretty much 3 cards. And based on your pitch and their interest level, they would ask for a script and a Bible. Now the Bible which is basically, this is what the show is about. You're writing not just to sell the show, you're writing to the writers that will eventually come on the show. And generally there was a little more artwork thrown into that to see, like in case of the gummy bears, each of the gummy bears and their personalities and their relationships and possible story ideas. And then based on just the script and the Bible, they would give you a green light or a no for the show, which today they want like animated reels. There's all this insane development. Generally, of course, you're not pitching to networks, as much these days. But within the companies, whether they're pitching to a cable company, it's like they practically want to see the series before you sell it. So there's a lot more effort going in. I know Disney, when they're doing a younger show, they came up with this step, which I think is totally bogus, where they make a storybook of pictures and the basic story, and they basically read it to kids. And it's like reading a book to a child is an entirely different experience than a kid sitting in front of a TV set with a bunch of distractions going on. So, I mean, it's useful, I suppose, if the kids wander away and don't like it when you're reading it to them, but that just shows how many weird ways to pitch shows then. What we would do, like when we got into the Disney afternoon, we're doing syndicated shows, we're just pitching in-house. We're pitching to Michael Eisner, Rich Frank, and Jeffrey Katzenberg, and you're basically doing as much art and story as you think it takes to get the show, seeing what the heart of the show, the high concept of the show, certainly the title. And sometimes we were told to do shows based on the title. That's how Darkwing Duck was invented.
Perfect segue. Darkwing Duck, man. I had to show my son this morning the theme song of Darkwing Duck because he was like, "What?" I was like, "Man, this show, man, we have to get out after school and run to the TV to watch Darkwing Duck."
Oh yeah.
Let's talk about the height of the popularity of Darkwing Duck. Did you guys think that Darkwing Duck was going to be as popular as it was when you guys were developing it?
No. And basically, here's the difference. I always say my friends at Features, like Ron and Glenn and the other guys, they could go into a movie theater and sit in an audience and hear the reactions of people around them. They know when people are fascinated, when it's quiet, or when they're laughing and all that, or when they're sniffing because it's so emotional. We didn't have any of that. We were doing shows that by the time they got on the air, we were kind of like in syndication. We were finishing the equivalent of the first season, and we got numbers back. We got ratings, and we were told whether it was doing well or not. But generally, they always said, "Oh yeah, these are doing well." I don't remember, a series where they said, "This one could be trouble." At least they never said it to us. So, it wasn't until I was retired and was a guest at my first convention as a guest in Atlanta, MomoCon, and I had people come up, and these women broke down into tears because Darkwing's relationship to Goslin, his adopted daughter, was like an emotional core to that show for these women who had had a rough family life, and that was repeated over and over, and that was a shock to me. But really, as far as popularity, it wasn't until, like I say, at the end of my career, when I'm sitting at a table, you know, with drawings of these characters and people coming up and saying, "Oh, this meant so much to me," and all that. So,
and it meant to, I mean, all the kids in the neighborhood would come in our living room and watch Darkwing Duck in the afternoon after school, and then we would play basketball after. It was crazy. It was a thing.
Yeah.
That's crazy.
But you know, it wasn't like it was such. A lot of our shows were like this. They're comedy adventures, which, when it comes to merchandising, is like a weird category. If you have just an adventure line, like, you know, DC superheroes, you can put out a bunch of toys. We had Darkwing toys, but because they were comedy and they kind of pitched them young, it wasn't like, and I don't know that you could do real dramatic little action figures. So we had these bigger figures, and they put out a line of toys, and they designed a second line of toys that was never made. So that's one of the indicators of whether you have a huge success or not. Like Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. They don't need an excuse to do a new season or a new variation because they sell a truckload of toys. So, you know, we didn't have that in our, you know, however Darkwing went. So we didn't know how popular it was, other than, you know, we were told it was successful, but, you know, we were in the dark. You know, we were on to the next show. Now, Darkwing was great in that usually you only do 65 episodes, because that was the business model. You do 13 weeks of 5 episodes a week. That's enough to run forever as far as the syndication people are concerned. With Darkwing, in the middle of production, I don't know who pitched it to ABC or how they found out about it. This is before Disney owned them. They had heard about the show, and they wanted 13 episodes of Darkwing Duck. And what was so cool is the company couldn't cheat the syndicators. ABC got 13, but that meant we got to do another 13 to fill up the syndication block. And the way we treated ABC is we couldn't let them see everything, because, again, we can't let them have the 13 best episodes or whatever they consider the best episodes, because we had this syndication, you know, kingdom to feed that was started by DuckTales. So we basically showed them a few at a time. They might see scripts, they might see storyboards, or they might see some preliminary animation that was done, depending on where it was, to get this, you know, decision. And the rule was, this is your only chance to pick these 5 or any one of them, or, you know, and if you get the next batch and you think they all stink and you want this batch, it's off the table. Because that way they had to be serious, make a decision or not, or make a decision to take it or not. And then that was our way of feeding them, you know, different things and making sure it was fair to the syndicators. And then ABC, and again, the other rule was ABC was not allowed to give notes other than standards and practices. So that was pretty cool. ABC wanted a second season, and that season had to go through the normal network process of people telling you how your character should act and, you know, that sort of thing. But it's still, those 13 episodes are now mixed in with, you know, all the episodes that are on the Disney Plus, and you can't tell. You know, the second season had great episodes too.
Ted, I want to talk about some of the restrictions and some of the other properties that you've worked on. You worked on the Aladdin property. Being that it was a movie, was there any strict creative parameters to that?
I used to share an office with Ron Clemens, and when they said they wanted me to do Aladdin, I went over and talked to Ron and John and said, you okay with this? And they had no problems with it. In fact, when Return of Jafar made so much money for the company that it started a new division, and I told them the bonus I got, kind of sheepishly, because it's like, why was Return of Jafar a huge success? Because Aladdin was a fantastic, movie. If the one had been put out before the other, I'm sure the outcome would have been different. Anyway, their reaction was just, you got screwed. And basically, I never thought of it that way. But if you did a crummy sequel to some great movie and it pulled in as much money as Return of Jafar did, you'd be getting a 7-picture deal and probably a free car in your driveway. But animation, it's like, oh, thank you for these crumbs, sir. So anyway, the restrictions of doing a series, really, we couldn't use Robin Williams. He was feuding with Disney at the time, nor would he have had time to do it. But that was fine. Dan Castaneda did a great job of capturing a different kind of feeling for the genie and keeping heart to it and all that. And I always thought that outside of the genie, the funniest character in the movie was Iago the parrot. So really that Return of Jafar storyline was just my way of getting Iago out of the lamp and part of the bunch, because I knew having that guy play off the others would be hilarious, and it was, having him in the show. But it wasn't in terms of restrictions. I was very self-conscious, of course, with my full feature background, that we did our version of full animation, but it's, there's no way to do what, the guys at Features was doing.
Tad, you're a legend in animation in your own right. You've educated me so far in this interview, mentioning names. So some of these names, of the past, I'm not too privy to. So this gives me an opportunity to kind of put some of these names into context. Tad, who is on your Mount Rushmore of animation, and why?
I don't know. That's hard because I'm old. So it's like my Rushmore gets chiseled a lot earlier than people.
And that's what we want to know, because it's all a continuum.
Famously, there was Walt's 9 Old Men, and that phrase comes from when FDR was president. He had his Supreme Court, and they referred to him as his 9 Old Men. And so when you hear about the 9 Old Men of Disney, those are the guys that Walt really trusted, and they really organized the studio. And most of them were at the studio when I started. And then I got to work with Ward Kimball, who was one of them. But certainly Ward, with just ingenuity and inventiveness and just kookiness and a fun style of animation, he'd be there. I don't know. The other ones, you could almost throw a dart in a board of pictures of them, and any one of them were, fantastic. So that's generally, I don't know that I could pick any one. We used to be able to check out the actual animation it's not a copy, the actual animation from the archives or the morgue.
Or better yet, we don't want to stratify them. We want to make people aware, for the people that might not know, like, who are some of these pioneers that kind of paved the way. So it could be more than 4. One's not over the other, but it's mainly just to say these people's names so that people are aware, because they might want to go in a deep dive and research.
Basically, if you Google Disney's 9 Old Men, you'll get a rundown of all those guys. Frank and Ollie were famous. It's Frank Thomas, Ollie Johnson, who later wrote the book Disney Animation: The Illusion of Life, which has my eyes in them. They did in their pages about expressions with eyes. They took pictures of a bunch of us, and basically how our eyebrows and cheeks work together and all that. And so we're on page 455 or something like that. Milt Kahl was fantastic. He was, at the time, most people pointed to him as the top animator at the time. You know, my regret of many is that I didn't make use of those guys more, because I had never worked directly with them. I got to work with Ken Anderson, who is not one of the 9 old men, but he was a premier story guy and had just a great, you'd walk into his room and it was just full of these fantastic ink and marker drawings that were great. And then after a while I realized, oh, he keeps the best ones up from all his various projects, you know, and he gave me some of those when he left. But Wooly Reitherman was the director I worked under. He did the T-Rex in Fantasia, but he basically kept that feature machine working. Possibly not the best stories or the strongest or the most emotional features of the day, but he was great at keeping what was in front of you entertaining at the time. Anyway, the John Lounsbury was fantastic. I got to talk to him a little bit, and Eric Larson was the guy in charge of the training program. And I knew a bunch about animation from those animation books my dad had. So I wish I had used Eric more. That's what he was there for, is to just say, hey, look at this, look at this. But it was funny. After you finished your 2 personal tests that decided whether or not you're staying, you became an in-betweener. So you're working on the production, and in-betweening is kind of a way of learning on the job, because you're seeing how the animator times things. I was a terrible in-betweener. I almost got fired because I was such a bad in-betweener. Meanwhile, you do personal tests in your spare time to show the review board to move up. I kept coming up with ideas, starting to work on them, and then going, no, I have a better idea and all that. I realized later that, oh, that's because I rather figure out what the characters do than actually make them do it, although I enjoyed the animation process. But that almost, you know, I resurrected an old test I had of, I think, Merlin and Madame Mim, and I had it on the Moviola, and the manager of the department came by, and I said, hey, Ed, could you come in here and look at this? I'm thinking of going back in and finishing this, you know, do you think I should, you know, I told him what I planned, and he says, no, just show it as is, this is great. I'm going, oh, I felt pretty good. And then he said, yeah, we had basically given up on you. It's like, what? It was like I had constantly been doing things that nobody saw, and so they thought I just was one of those people who were going to hang around and do whatever. So it was kind of like, you know, short heart attack. But it's kind of like, you think there could have been like a 6-month profile where you come in and talk to somebody about how things are going. Anyway, that went well. I became an assistant animator out of that. But I did realize really I should be headed toward story, and I did story on Fox and Hound. It's uncredited. That's back when there were very, very few credits. That was before the days of, you know, 8-minute long credits at the end, where if you're a baby born at the right time, you get a credit. I was not.
Ted, I want to talk to you about another legend, not in animation, but he's a legend in comic books. I want to talk about your working relationship with Mike Mignola and how that led into the Hellboy animated movies.
Mike, God, one of the most creative people I've ever met, and hilarious, very dry wit. But basically, when I left Disney, when Disney showed me the door, basically, after all my work in TV animation, I needed sample scripts of my own. And well, backing up a little bit, one of the last things I did at Disney was a television spin-off of Atlantis, and called Team Atlantis. And it was a real hard sell within the company, because Disney Saturday Morning was just turning into one Saturday Morning, which was kind of softer, more educational. And here we're pitching this action adventure show, which we were doing thinking syndication, but the syndication market had, once talk shows became available, Oprah and all that, suddenly there were very few stations running cartoons anymore. Anyway, it was a hard sell. Finally, they shoved it down, and I thought it was going to be on this station, the new channel called Toon Disney. And then it came down, yeah, it's going to be on ABC. And I almost heard the death note in the background, because it was like, it totally doesn't fit on that. And they resisted it, every pitch and all that, even though the department, this crew, thought this was the best thing that Disney had ever done, because it was this action adventure thing. It was spooky. It was like our X-Files. Mike Mignola, I got to know because I'd send him the scripts or a synopsis or just talking through a story, and he'd do a concept sketch for whatever monster, whatever was did a great Loch Ness monster, I remember. Anyway, so I knew Mike from that. That didn't, Atlantis came out, was deemed a flop. They totally pulled all support from it. And ABC said, nope, we don't need this show. So luckily we had 3 episodes far enough into production that they said, well, let's tie this together as a supposed sequel, where it was actually 3 episodes. And then they said, yeah, you can do some animation to tie it together. At the time, the executive thought we were going to do like 5 minutes, and we did 15 minutes because we really tried to make it a story and a premise for more adventures. And that was called Milo's Return, I think, Atlantis 2. Anyway, at a certain point, Disney said, okay, we're done. You cost too much. Management had changed. The same executive who fired me then went to features and tried to fire Ron and John. And they were out there talking to other people until John Lasseter, who had gone to school with John for that matter, came in and said, you don't fire your heritage, you don't fire your legends, basically, and brought them back in. No one was doing that for me. So, and I wish I had made, I was too much of a guy saying, oh, you made the decision. Michael Eisner actually called me and he said the words of the phone call, if there's anything I can do for you. And of course, what's in my head? Not fire me? Anyway, it was, what I should have said, I've worked here and here. I've worked at Imagineering and all of that. Company's much bigger. Surely there's a spot for somebody who's a creative thing. Who knows, maybe would have assigned a junior executive to me to find a spot in the company. Whatever, suddenly I was out on the street, kept alive by all my banked vacation hours, because my boss, who took vacations every year, seemed to keep me, thought I was too important to take vacations. I got like 2 weeks a year, even though I was owed 3 weeks a year. I lived off that. My family lived off that while I stumbled around trying to figure out what I was going to do. And doing that, I called up Mike and I said, can I do 2 like half-hour Hellboy scripts? And Mike said, fine. So he basically, I pitched him and treated him as a resource. And the second one, he said, I really can't put this much time into something that's not going. And that paid off when they did want to make Hellboy animated things. It was like a meeting of 5 groups: the studio, Revolution Studios, who owned the rights because they had released the movie, Cartoon Network, who was going to air the series, because at the time it was supposed to be a series. Basically everybody except the guys, the studio that was going to actually produce the thing, when they say, who's going to do this? Everybody said my name. And the studio went, we never find out who this guy was. Anyway, that started. I got to, work on actually 3 Hellboy animated movies, which was great. And work with Mike was fantastic. So, I mean, I kind of lost touch with Mike. I mean, I see him at conventions every once in a while. I was talking to him all the time. And then I was out of work for a year and a half, and I think I just kind of withdrew. Instead of reaching out to people, I stopped talking to people and, kind of drifted away. But again, he was the most incredible guy. One of the things I did was Turok, Son of Stone, the most violent thing I've ever done. And I said, they're doing it, and luckily it's not based on the video game because other people have the rights to that. So we have to base it on the Turok that was in the Gold Key comics, back when Karl Marx was doing Uncle Scrooge. Right. And that was what Mike and I had both grown up with, so it's fine with that. And I said, so basically I said, Turok is this guy, this young friend who had arrows that they dipped into poison berries and fought dinosaurs. And Mike said, no, Turok is the guy who has a young friend, dips his arrows into, poison berries, shoots and kills a dinosaur, makes boots out of their skin, and walks across lava. I don't know if that was ever appeared in a comic, but that's how his brain worked. It's like, ooh, how do you take it to another level? How do you make it more adventurous? So, awesome guy, and he's turning out new universes even as we speak.
Right, and then also you have a few comic credits related to the Hellboy animated: Pyramids of Death, The Menace of the Mechanical Monster. You've been a storyboard artist, seasoned storyboard artist. What's the difference between doing storyboard art and doing layouts for comic book pages?
It's really a different medium in that when you're doing storyboards, you constantly have to think about time. In that, if a character, okay, let me talk about comics for a second. I remember reading there's a Spider-Man throwing a punch, hitting, the Vulture or something like that. And meanwhile, he is saying a quip, quit talking, you sound like you were vaccinated with a phonograph needle, while he's punching him. And that was Stan Lee putting his in stuff there. In animation, to do that, you can't, because it takes how long to say that line and how fast you have to do the punch. You have to think in different terms. And I used to think of that as, for a little while, thinking, well, that's not realistic. And I realized, no, that's a plus, not a minus. It's like, that's a different medium. You do different things. So I had fun doing those two Hellboy junior stories, basically. Unfortunately, the first one, they put an artist on it and they misunderstood what Mike and I wanted, which was, no, treat this as a serious Hellboy thing. Don't make the artwork simpler and all of that. And then I drew the second story, so I did writing and drawing of it, and not the best work or the most professional work I would have wanted to turn out, but I can't go back in time and do it now. But that's the difference. One is the film medium, and it's all about timing and editing and all that. You can do some of that, and Mike does this in his comics. He'll cut to a bird with one note, like, oh, I get the bird is, and cut to it. I mean, he'll do a little inset panel, and the bird will have a note, and you get it. Oh, the bird's singing. And then something changes, and the colors change or whatever. You cut back to the bird, and it's got a word balloon. Nothing's in it. And you realize that's a comic symbol of everything went quiet. And there's things you can do with that I love about comics, that, when I played around with things on my own, that's like, no, that's a different way of using the comic page. You have to do pace in a different way on a comic page versus in storyboarding. You've literally got a clock to the next commercial that you have to get X amount of things done.
I got a collectibles question real quick before I get to a storyboard question. People often buy Cels, right? Animation Cels. They're very collectible, especially pre-digital era, right? Where you can get the cell. Who's drawing that cell? Like, is it printed like a screen, like a silk screen or something, or is that people actually drawing on there?
The only way TV animation, for that matter, Disney features probably would have been stopped until they invented the Xerox process. The Xerox process was first used actually on Sleeping Beauty for like long shots. They'd animate the figure bigger and then shrink it down and print it in Xerox for these distance shots. And it was like the line was like this razor thin, beautiful line, which fit the rest of the picture. Whereas with the 101 Dalmatians, which is one of my favorite features at Disney, there were times they left, especially Milt Kahl wanted the construction lines that he left in. He wanted that on. So to him, it was where Walt, I don't think he evidently didn't consider Dalmatians the artistic landmark, some of us do, because he wanted you to forget that it's a cartoon, forget that they're drawings, and suck you into the story. But anyway, that suddenly, instead of all these people having to do these tracings, which aren't the best. I used to have a cell from Fantasia where a centaur was holding up a vat of wine, a bucket of wine, and his arm was a right angle, but the inker had just kind of made it a swoop, so he had kind of a fin-like arm instead of, when you look at the original drawings, which I had access to at the studio, and it's like, no, the guy really took time to do this drawing and show the muscle and all that, but the inker was just going, I got 100 of these to get out today or whatever. So in TV, the same thing. You needed cost cutting, and Xerox kept it cheaper. So my first shows were, Darkwing, were done on Cels. They weren't, they weren't digitally done. So if you called too many retakes because they had done something wrong, the Cels would start getting scratched, and it's like you'd start seeing weirdness in the backgrounds dancing around. So anyway, you would see, what we sent overseas was as much as possible to control it, like creating something by remote control. But instead of walking down the hall and handing it to an animator, you sent it overseas to another studio in another country with an exposure sheet. Sometimes there were little drawings in the exposure sheet that our timing directors would do that showed what shape of mouth to do at what point, and how much of an anticipation to a jump, and then where the peak of the leap would be, which is a fascinating thing. It's like animating without drawing for the most part. So that's whose drawings you're seeing are the artists overseas, Xeroxed, and they're doing our background painters would do key backgrounds for a whole sequence, not for a scene, for like, here's the background layout guys would draw a background that has most of the information. So you might get 3 walls basically, but that's going to be divided up into like 20 scenes, but at least that's the color pattern. So that's what then guys overseas are doing the background painting, other people are doing the animation, then it's Xerox and it gets painted over there, the camera shot over there, and then it gets sent to us. And we get to call retakes to a certain level, and then you take what you get. It's time to get it on the air.
So correct me if I'm wrong. So there's no real way of knowing who actually did that particular cell. But you're saying it's mostly a Xerox of some art that's been kind of animated throughout.
Yeah. So no cell is the art, the literal art of the animator, because going back to Snow White, that's all traced by somebody else. So you're getting a tracing of somebody of doing an artist's work, and then when Xerox came around, you're getting an accurate copy of the drawing. So that's closer. So
wow,
that's the thing. You're not getting. That's why a lot of people start collecting concept art or animation art. They're getting the actual paper, because that's the literal piece of art, the drawing, and yet that's not the thing that's on the screen. On the screen is the copy and the painted thing. And then when it went digital, it's, you know, it improved things in a lot of ways in that suddenly you had more control over color. You could do color variations that would be too tedious to do by hand. So there are pluses and minuses the whole way.
Man, I love you broke down that science while explaining it to the collectors how all that stuff works. Okay, now here's another one here. Now we're in the future now, or the present, however you want to shake it up. Do you think AI is sophisticated enough today to do storyboard work? What are your overall thoughts with that right now?
I mean, in general, in the artistic community, there's just a general hatred of AI because at best it is using hundreds of pieces of artwork done by other people to create something new. They're scraping the information off the internet. You know, if there was a way to say, oh, this is the artwork you took from to create this AI thing, and that guy gets a residual or something like that, you know, the AI companies fight that tooth and nail because they couldn't exist. They wouldn't get enough. They'd be paying out too much money. And storyboarding, it's like it can do something, and I suppose you could ask for enough corrections, certainly in the future, to get to the point. But at some point, if you're a storyboard guy, it's like, God, it's just easier if I draw it. Just draw it the right way. For people who can't draw or try doing things on a budget, you know, there's weird stuff out there, you know, of just, you know, I get commercials. There's this commercial of this older woman who's going out of business at her jewelry store, and she's, you know, I'm having this great sale, and you realize this is not a real woman. This is a photorealistic created person. And then they cut to her where it's just a voiceover so that they don't have to do the mouth sync and all of that. And it's like being used all over. And to me, there is a creative decision made by a human being that makes it unique, you know. Today is the 50th, when we're recording this, is the 50th anniversary of Jaws. Jaws is a near perfect movie. I mean, it's just a fantastic movie. And why? There's a whole reason how it came out the way it was. Vernon Fields was the editor, the scientist, Spielberg, who is fantastic. The damn shark wouldn't work, so they planned to show the shark a lot more, and instead, we can't use it. We're just going to build up the suspense in a different way. That way improved the movie. All of those mistakes and things like that. Now try to imagine, okay, I'm going to create an AI movie because I've got these guys who are really great at doing input and describing what's neat. Well, it's like, unless that guy's a genius to describing it, all that, at best, that AI would have to look at Jaws, look at a bunch of other, I mean, it couldn't do Jaws before there was Jaws. You could program in a bunch of sharks. You could, you can get all sorts of visuals and visuals of oceans and all that. It's not like, write me a story. What are the odds that it's going to come up with something as riveting as that, And of course, for somebody who wants to play with art like a video game, and that's a lot of what you see, it's like, oh, I've never drawn. Yeah, it's a toy. It's a game, And the sad thing is, like, yeah, and if your game catches on too much, you're going to be putting a lot of human beings out of work. And then once you get to the point where, no, we don't have enough creative people creating things for the AI to learn from, AI is going to start learning from AI. So where does the improvement come? Instead, it's it's the old copy of a copy of a copy of a copy thing. Each generation is a little crappier than the one before.
Ted, we have two more questions for you. I want to ask you, you've worked in every animation genre, or you've worked in every genre in animation. What's your favorite genre to work in animation and to produce?
I would say comedy adventure. Most of the stuff we did at Disney was a sliding scale between comedy and adventure, and where you put that. I have a pet project that if I ever get resettled in the new house, which we're hoping for, I would create probably a hybrid of a book and a comic, whereas the comic, there are illustrations that are actually panels, and they don't illustrate something there, they continue the story. So I get the fun of doing those drawings, but they're both, one is like, imagine Goslin of Darkwing Duck, you know, this incorrigible character, or Calvin from Calvin and Hobbes, you know, on a space adventure with his parents, doesn't really want to be there, and then suddenly is in charge of these three incredibly powerful beings. You know, that's one of my ideas, and the heart is obviously there, but here this guy thought this little kid thinks he was going to basically control, imagine King Kong and Godzilla, but instead he gets the toddler versions of them. So suddenly he has to be the parent to keep them in control. And it's like, there's just plenty of humor in that, and yet I could do all sorts of science fiction adventure, you know, on the planet they find themselves on. And that's the most fun. I like to be funny and be, you know, and have all the heart in there, as well as the spooky adventure. Because I have another project that, you know, I put some of it online, you know, pages online, where it's the tag used to be when most kids are worrying about acne, Emerin broke out in wings. And it's basically one day she wakes up and she's got fairy wings, and it turns out she's only half human. And she can't control things at worst. And basically being in that, suddenly all these people on the other side of reality are going, wait, we basically sense a disturbance in the force. And it's like, who is this person? And they're not supposed to be doing whatever they're doing. And that would be feeding a kind of a fantasy side. It would be a different kind of humor, because she's not the crazy kid that science fiction idea was. But I'd be able to say, okay, all the darker Mike Mignola stuff I can play with, and, you know, who are the forces of fantasy that she's suddenly blundering into, you know. So that's it. I mean, it's on the sliding scale. Those are the things that are the most fun for me.
Tad, our very last question. Is there something that we haven't talked about you want the fans to know about? Any upcoming projects? Any more appearances?
No, I mean, just because of what's going on now, I'm not doing any more cons in the near future. I'd like to get back into that. That was just so much fun, traveling around, meeting fans. And I don't have a bunch of merchandise that I need to sell, or books for that matter. Maybe someday in the future. At best, I'm doing covers for Dynamite Comics for the new Darkwing Duck run that's going right now by Dan Kibble-Smith. I'm illustrating one of the covers on each of the issues, and another project coming up that I cannot divulge yet. But that's fun, so I can have those to sign or whatever. But generally, I have to be invited to a convention, because it's not like I have a business and, okay, I'm going to pay for plane fare and shipping and all of that. So basically, I get invited as a guest, and then I have to create original artwork to sell, just so I have something on the table. Although this last convention I did was a lot of fun, because, again, I was trying to clean out my garage. I had all these old Disney toys and collectibles and things like that, and I had a bag from the original DuckTales that was a Scrooge McDuck money bag. And I just filled it with all collectibles. And anybody who bought something from me could reach in and get one, or if they were just a kid coming up, could reach in and get things. And there was a lot of fun when the kids pulled out something that their parents really wanted. I just said, "Hey, Father's Day is coming up." So.
You're executive producer on the new reboot of Darkwing Duck, correct?
No, I'm just a consultant. And I have to tell people, and I've seen very little of it. It's still in works. It has changed from the first thing I saw. It's changed drastically, so I really don't know which variation is now. But I know I don't know that I was officially announced, but it leaked out that I was a consultant on this reboot. And fans are going crazy saying, like, well, Dad Stones is on it, so of course it's going to be great. You know, it's going to be true to the original. And I have to remind people, I said, the definition of a consultant is someone you pay for advice that you don't have to listen to. So it's like they give me something, I can react to it, and it's up to them. It's their creative project to do. It's like when Mike Mignola worked with Guillermo del Toro's Hellboy. And that's exactly how Mike feels it's Guillermo's Hellboy. And he calls my things Tad's Hellboy, even though I was doing everything I could to be way closer to the comics than even Guillermo was. And that's true of all his other projects, because he says the real Hellboy is the stuff he does. It's in the comics. So if you want to get a feeling for that, read the comics. So as for things stand, I don't really have anything coming up.
You just shared a lot.
Common up to play. So.
You just shared a lot, Tad, and we are so appreciative of it. We want to thank you for joining us at Sig Slayers. I just want to let you know that you always have a home here, and just thank you again. This was a wonderful treat.
Oh, it was great. Happy to be here.
Thank you, Tad.
Well, that's all for our show. If you like what you see, please subscribe and hit the like button. This is Sig Slayers. I'm Mike, speaking for Mark and Tad Stones. We are out. Peace.
Sig Slayers.